Okay, good morning. Sorry, good afternoon. This is my fourth tutorial today, so it's been a lot. Okay, so today I have two things planned. Um, one of them I think is pretty important. The other one, if we don't get to it, I'm not super concerned. Um, the first thing that I want to do is I want to talk about a case, and I want to sort of draw out where the principles in this case come from and uh, use that to, I think, shed some light um, on what we've been talking about for the past week. So here's the case. I'm going to put the name of the case in the chat, and I want to give you guys a minute or two to get your notes, get your text if you want, do some Googling, get some information about this case in front of your eyeballs, and then we will have a conversation. Okay? So here's the case. It is Walsh versus Lonsdale. Walsh versus Lonsdale. Okay? So take a couple of minutes and get some things in front of your face, and we'll talk about it in just a second. $18.82, Ricardo. Okay, so let's begin. We begin as we always begin when we talk about a case. What are the facts, right? What's the thing that brings Walsh and Lonsdale into the courthouse? How did we get here? Yes, Brittany, this is correct. And given that I think it is word for word what was said by someone in a different tutorial, I'm assuming you were looking at the same source. And that is, and I say that just as a remark of an irony, not this is not a criticism. So yeah, so not a big deal. Okay, so yes, we have this cotton mill, and Walsh and Lonsdale have a contract where Walsh is going to operate this cotton mill that Lonsdale owns. And there's more to the contract. There's this complicated formula for calculating the rent that is not especially important. The important point is that Lonsdale has the right under the contract to demand a year's rent payable in advance. Okay? But there's never been a deed, right? The contract says we're going to execute a deed for this lease, but that was never done. So Walsh has been paying his rent quarterly by arrears, and then along comes Lonsdale, who demands a year's payment in advance. When Walsh says no, what does Lonsdale do? So when the last thing in the facts, as you describe them, is that Walsh refuses to pay the year's rent. What does Lonsdale do when Walsh refuses to pay? I mean, that is what he does, right? He distrains Walsh's goods, right? So what does it mean to distrain goods? Exactly, right? Distress, being the noun form, is a common law remedy for a landlord to seize the chattels of tenants who are behind on rent. Okay? So let's step back a little bit. We have this relationship that the parties presumably contemplated would go on for at least 7 years, possibly longer, right? There was always the possibility that they might extend the relationship beyond that, but certainly for 7 years. And here we are a year and a half in, and Walsh has been paying in arrears. And, Lonsdale has been going, sure, great, I'll take this money. And then a year and a half in, Lonsdale blows the whole thing up. Does this seem puzzling to anybody? Like, what happened here? Why did this relationship go so sour? So let me ask a different question. What does it mean to pay rent in arrears? So the facts that Brittany provides tell us that Walsh was paying the rent quarterly in arrears. What does that mean? Why is that phrase there? What should we infer from that? Right. That's exactly right. It's paying your rent at the end of the month, right? Or in this case, at the end of the quarter, rather than paying it at the beginning. This strikes me as being much more common in a commercial setting than in a residential setting, because in a commercial setting, there's a strong possibility that you may need to take possession of the property so that you can use it to make the money that will let you pay the rent. In particular, things like agricultural land, right? That seems very likely to have a rent in arrears situation. Because I don't know about you guys, but I have been renting my home since I was 18 years old, and I have never, not once, had a landlord that would accept rent in arrears. They always wanted rent in advance. So that sort of is an interesting wrinkle in itself, right? The fact that Walsh was paying in arrears. But what changed? Why did Lonsdale show up and suddenly demand a year's payment in advance? And I should tell you, there's not really a right answer to this question. It's just, this is an informed speculation, right? So any answer that's consistent with what we do in fact know could be correct. And we're trying to get a sense of what's the scope of things that could be right. Ricardo says he probably needed the money. I think, that's definitely an explanation, right? Lonsdale has some sort of cash flow issue and can't wait for the money to come in over the next 12 months, needs it all today. Absolutely possible, right? What about other explanations? Is there any reason to think that maybe there was some evidence that the relationship was going, that Lonsdale knew something about where this relationship was going that's not present in the facts? Think about it like this. This is a cotton mill that Walsh starts operating in 1879. There be anything happening out in the world that would be relevant to the cotton industry that might suggest that, a particular mill might not be a going concern for much longer? This was the Industrial Revolution, so this is an early industrial cotton mill, right? Absolutely, there's the possibility of advancements in technology, right? These are things that may suggest that maybe this mill was outdated and maybe it wouldn't be operating much longer, right? Uh, Ricardo suggests that he wanted to use the mill for himself. That's possible. Seems less likely. Um, just because, like, why, you know, why buy the cow, so to speak? You know, uh, what about issues with supplies? Anything that might be going on that would suggest that there were going to be changes in the way in which cotton was supplied? I did ask a question. The question was, um, what might there be about the cotton supply that would uh, change how that would change our expectations of a particular cotton mill? Could it be the demand for cotton has dropped given that there were new advancements in clothes making technology faster as opposed to the time it would take to cotton making? Um, hmm, maybe, right? But what about the fact that um, you know, this is uh, this is right around the time, this is about 20 years after the Lancashire textile mill strikes of the 1850s. It's about 15 years after the end of the American Civil War. Um, you know, this is a time when cotton is in flux, right? The cotton supply is unreliable and prices are difficult to predict. Um, the labor supply is hard to manage and fractious and prone to striking. And so what I think is going on here is I think we're watching a business die. And Lonsdale sees the future, knows that Walsh is about to go out of business, and he's rushing in to try and get whatever money he can get out of this before it blows up in his face. Why are we taking the time to like go through all of this and try and understand this larger context? The answer is because your clients don't show up in your office with a problem like out of nothing. This problem has a context. This problem comes from somewhere. And if you can understand the things that bring your clients into your office, if you can understand why they've shown up, you can put yourself in a situation where you can provide better and more comprehensive advice that will help them solve their problems. Okay? So that's why I'm asking you these sort of very broad questions about why are Walsh and Lonsdale even having this dispute? Because that's part of understanding where we got, how we got to this, is we have to be able to understand how the relationship went sour. And how it went sour, I think, is that Walsh was about to be bankrupt and Lonsdale wanted to get whatever money he could get his hands on. And the best way for him to do that was to distrain the goods. Okay, so now that we understand the context, can someone explain to me why does Walsh say that the distress was unlawful? Right? Because remember, Walsh is the plaintiff here. Lonsdale has grabbed the goods. He holds the chattels. Walsh is saying, "Hey, give me those back." What's his argument? Right. Brittany, that's absolutely correct. Right. So Brittany says that for the lease to come into existence in the common law, there has to be a deed. And so, and Walsh says, look, if the deed had been done, ha 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 ha. If the deed had been done, then Lonsdale's distress would have been lawful, right? I He would have had every right to come and take my goods if we had executed the deed. Okay. And he says, but we didn't. And so he doesn't. He can't avail himself of this remedy. What does Walsh say he has, right? What's the interest in the land that Walsh claims? What's the interest in the land that Walsh claims? So he can't own nothing, right? He has to have some sort of interest in the land, because if he owns nothing, then he's trespassing. But what does he think he owns? Because he doesn't claim the 7-year tenancy, because if he claimed the 7-year tenancy, he loses the case. And he doesn't claim that he owns nothing, because if he owns nothing, he loses the case because he's a trespasser and he has no rights. Okay, so what does he claim? What does he claim? What does he say? This is what I have. Pardo says he argued that he didn't have the 7-year lease, but that he only paid quarterly. I mean, these are statements of fact, right? So he is arguing that he doesn't have the 7-year lease. What is he arguing that he has? What's the interest in land that he has? Not what he paid. What does he have? So Brittany says that he has an interest to use the land to gain a profit under the lease. By the way, guys, it's going to be much easier if you if you're going to insist on using the chat. It's going to be a lot easier if you send your messages to everyone rather than privately to me. And I haven't said anything about it, but I'm going to say something now. Like that would be helpful for all of us. Okay. So would it be that he has an interest to use the land to gain a profit under the lease? Do we think that this is a legal interest in land? Does law provide for use? The answer, of course, is no. Law says either you own it or you don't, right? So tenants, if they have a legal lease, they own the land, okay? But they own it subject to the landlord's superior claim under certain circumstances, and they own it for a specific term, okay? So it's not a use interest. If Walsh is claiming a legal interest, it must be an ownership interest. What is it? By the way, guys, I'm a little concerned about the sources you guys are finding because it took me about 2 seconds of Googling to find a source that would explain to me what Walsh was claiming he owned. And you guys are not the first people I've said that to. So I think you may not be looking at the best sources. See, you're guessing, Ricardo. I promise you, if you go and find in the text, in the Owusu text on the internet, you find a good description of this case, it will tell you exactly what Walsh is saying he owns. I know because I've looked at it. Like, one thing that I think maybe not always helpful to you guys is that I ask two different kinds of questions. Sometimes I'm asking a question where I want you guys to think, right? I want you to think through something and give me some analysis. And then sometimes I ask you questions where I know there's an answer in front of you and I just need you to find it. Okay. This is one of those latter questions. And so when you give me answers that aren't what I'm looking for, what that says is that you're not looking in the right place. And I don't know how to tell you where to look other than to say, these are the places where you can find this. Because okay. Tell you what, we're going to call it here because it seems clear that you guys are not engaged today. And that's okay. We all have off days, but this is wasting everyone's time. And I don't want to do that. So let's just call it a day and we'll pick it back up next week and see if we can do a little better. So see you guys tomorrow, and we'll see you later. All right, take care.